Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Here's Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, let's look at this, a couple of other things on this terrorism front. The London Daily Mail had a big article this week. Angel is next. Angel is next. That's the threat that came into Bush. Basically, the voice of the invisible government, the voice of the rogue network. Most 9/11 books completely ignore the most important single piece of evidence of the entire day. The ultimatum delivered to Bush by the coup faction from behind the scenes, coming in loaded with code words from all intelligence agencies and other power agencies of the U.S. government, basically saying, we want you to go on television, or bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, 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 and that's going to be the war of civilizations because you, Sonny Boy, are going to invade Afghanistan. We've already drilled it with Unified Vision 01. We're all ready to go. You're going to give the order, and that's your fate. And if you don't do it, you'll be liquidated by sundown, and Cheney will give us what we want. And if he won't do it, we have a Committee of Public Safety ready to go, flying around in doomsday aircraft. So that's an interview with the pilot of Air Force One, apparently one of the first interviews that he's ever done. We've also got some interesting stuff about Bush at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. Haven't been able to sift through that quite enough, but it's highly interesting. I think this is on something called NNet. Check that, but it's up there. So look up Bush at Offutt, right, Nebraska, where he flew after the interlude there in Florida. Now, let's then shift into the question of in a second, we got to get the European financial crisis. Just on Petraeus, you look at the Republican field now. We've got Rick Perry, this desperate demagogue. His idea of a campaign is to say that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and it's got to be destroyed. If you're voting for Perry, you're basically voting to cut your own throat. He's not unlike other Republicans. This is what they all believe. But somebody like Romney has the brains not to say it. Obama also doesn't say it. We'll get to Obama in a minute. They're all interested in destroying Social Security. There's an elite consensus. But poor Perry doesn't have the guile to hide what he's doing. This makes him vulnerable. Remember, the Huntsman campaign had put out this interesting statement. The Republican field is a bunch of cranks. A bunch of cranks. Yes, they are a bunch of cranks. On economics, every one of them is a total crank, without exception. And he says, the weakest since 1940. That's Wendell Willkie. Now, if they're that bad, is there a Petraeus option? Yeah, there is. Suppose you get a deadlocked convention, you can get acclamation, you can get all sorts of things, especially under conditions of false flag. So again, Petraeus gets to the CIA on Tuesday, and a terror alert is issued on Friday. There you have it. Now, in terms of the European banking crisis, what seems to have happened overnight is that a Greek treasury bill auction has partially failed, right? Instead of having a bid to cover of more than one, the Greeks were only able to sell about half of the bonds they were trying to sell. As of this morning, the Greek interest rates are the following. On the 10-year Greek bond is a 20% interest rate that the Greek government would have to pay. A 50% interest rate on the 2-year Greek bond, and the 1-year Greek bond has a 100% interest rate. Now, obviously, you can't borrow at these levels. The Greeks have made a payment of $1.8 billion today. That doesn't seem to mean anything to these hyenas. On the 23rd of September, the Greeks will have to make a 2 billion euro payment. And CNBC is complaining that the privatization is not working. Remember Steve Forbes, the jackal, was over there trying to scarf up maybe the Parthenon. The austerity program is not as drastic and as genocidal as the banksters wanted. And the private sector participation is not enough, says CNBC. This simply indicates the power of the credit default swap. Now, European Pauls. Let's remember that what's happening here is a bailout of the banks. It's not a bailout of Greece, nor of Portugal, nor of Ireland, nor would it be of Spain, Italy, France, German states, Belgium, nor would it be anybody else. This is a bailout of banks. And any person who is willing to entertain that language, that it's a bailout of the Greeks, those lazy Greeks, they are simply, I think, terminally suffering from mental impairment. This is for the sake of the Deutsche Bank, not for the sake of the lazy Greeks. Deutsche, Commerz, Westdeutsche Landesbank. This is what is being bailed out. Now, the Netherlands Prime Minister says to the Greeks, accept our diktat or leave the euro. The problem with this is if the Greeks simply are kicked out, that will mean that they will pull down Deutsche Commerz, Westdeutsche Landesbank, Societe Generale, and the rest of them, right? Santander, Bilbao, all will blow. In the panic, all will blow. So this is simply a bluff. Now, given this situation, I recommend the following urgent measures for Europe. The first thing is you're being attacked with credit default swaps. Outlaw credit default swaps. Get some brains. Europeans, fight. You're going to have to fight speculators sooner or later. Why not fight them now? Why destroy a generation? Why destroy accumulated wealth? Why permit the ravaging of Europe by these speculative predators? This is the hedge fund hyenas, the locust funds, and the zombie bankers using credit default swaps. Stop them. Ban credit default swaps. While you're at it, you probably ought to ban collateralized debt obligations, too. Lloyd Blankfein, at his testimony last May, said maybe the CDO is a bridge too far. Maybe it should be banned. I would suggest a form of debt moratorium which would take this form. Cancel all derivatives. At least freeze them. Freeze derivatives. Freeze all payments on derivatives, all payments on financial energy derivatives and other derivatives for the duration of the crisis, or 5 years, whichever lasts longer. And we'll see who can decide when the crisis is over, because it won't be soon. Get this derivatives cancer under control. Get it into remission, at least. Next, the Euro-Tobin. It's great that Sarkozy and Merkel talked about this. They needed to impose it by executive order. Euro-Tobin, 1% tax, not this tiny little tax that they have. 1% on all financial turnover. That will stabilize markets, yes, indeed. Countries are going to need exchange controls. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to prevent hot money from flowing in and out and destroying the banking system and so forth. And then the Michele Ruggiero treatment. If the one magistrate in Trani, a little town in southeast Italy, can come up with raids on Moody's and Standard & Poor's, get the police action going, and put the fear of God into these speculators. Now, the prognosis, obviously, bad. Trichet, the head of the European Central Bank, says essentially the European perspective is pretty grim. They're going to keep interest rates low. Lagarde at the IMF has said to the European banks, you guys are in bad shape. You need to increase your capital. Too late for that, Christine. Way too late. The Swiss have intervened with support operations or negative support operations to keep the Swiss franc from going too high. If it goes too high, then this high technology, precision, quality instruments and other extremely valuable things that the Swiss can manufacture, that will all be destroyed. Well, I would make an appeal to Switzerland too. This is now an independent country with its own currency. Dear Swiss, do something. Become an example for the world. Be the Wilhelm Tell of credit default swaps. Ban them. Ban credit default swaps. Tax derivatives. You can do all of this with the emergency measures inside Switzerland. Save yourself. Don't fall prey to wild swings of currency that are going to destroy your productive economy, which is what you need. Forget your banks. Go with your high-precision instruments. Back in a minute.